Fine. So we've been speaking about the Beinoni, which is really the title of this book too. This book is not just called the Tanya, it's called Sefer Shel Beinonim, which means the book of Beinonim, or the book of the in-betweeners, referring to that level that we all should strive to attain. And that's the level in which our animal soul is completely subdued by the godly soul. We each have two souls, the godly soul and the animal soul, and the godly soul should be really the one in the driver's seat. Now, the animal soul does knock on the door of as we said, that's the expression we used at least, does knock on the door of the Beinoni, but the Beinoni has Gvura de Bina, which is the latest theme, which means discipline that comes from intelligence that's developed, Bina, to say no, because he understands that the animal soul is bad for him, but he also understands that his mind, as we said last week, should be filled with godliness. And when your mind is filled with godliness, then there's no room for negativities from without, or for the animal soul altogether, not even in the mind, certainly not in the speech or in the action, the other two realms that we live in. We spoke about, therefore, how the Beinoni also has true Bina. And many ways, the word Beinoni implies Bina. If you think about it, it has those same letters, Beinoni, Bina. But that's because the Beinoni has a connection with God that is so deeply intellectual also, that his mind is always filled with godliness. There's no boredom, there's no void, there's no emptiness, because those usually give birth to all sorts of negativities, and that's how the animal soul creeps in. That was the latest theme that we spoke about. Let's continue here, as you mentioned, top of page 13, chapter 13. Speaking about the Beinoni and versus the Tzaddik. That's really the last idea here. The Tzaddik has a complete hatred for evil. We quoted the verse in the book of Psalms that says, Ohavei Hashem sinura, those who love God despise, hate evil. He has a complete hatred for evil because the tzaddik is so infatuated with God, so in love, that anything that opposes God is hateful towards the tzaddik, because it's hateful towards what it loves the most, God. The Beinoni doesn't have that level yet, so he doesn't hate evil as much as the tzaddik does, but at least he understands that it's completely bad, and therefore he has some sort of distance from evil, negative feelings towards evil, but he doesn't have that consummate hatred that we're speaking about that the tzaddik has towards evil. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. Page 13. Does anyone want to read? Top of the page.
I'll read.
Okay.
Okay. With a consummate hatred and contempt, or without quite such complete hatred as is explained above. Chapter 10 of Tanya described the difference between the complete and the incomplete tzaddik. But in an intermediate person, within the Beinoni, even at times of spiritual elevation, the evil is not displaced. It is, by way of example, similar to a sleeping man who can awaken from his sleep. So is the evil in the intermediate person dormant, as it were, in the left part, during the recital of the Shema and the Amidah prayer, when his heart is aglow with the love of God.
Right. Just continue just with this paragraph here that explains this. Yeah.
Though the Beinoni does not achieve an essential mastery of good, he can reach something analogous, an inundation of good, an experience of love and awe of God that overwhelms his awareness. This is no regular event, but something that can come during his service to God, in particular while reciting the Shema and other prayers that inspire this feeling. When it comes, it is no mere emotional peak. It is the blossoming of a true love of God. At that moment, it might appear that the evil inside him has died, that his heart is void of negative energy. The evil, though, is only slumbering.
Right, but later it can wake up again.
But later it can wake up again.
Right, so it's important to understand this, because I'm sure we all experience that on maybe on a lower level. sorry, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I can experience this on the lower level. Many of you, I'm sure, Benoni, and you experience that on a on this level, on a higher level. But we all have moments throughout our lives, and even sometimes throughout our weeks, and even sometimes throughout the day, in which we have this spiritual awakening. And it's called an awakening, as the Tanya calls it, or even as the Song of Songs calls it. There's a great verse in the Song of Songs that is really a love story. And many commentaries have said that this is a love story between God and the human being, to the point that, just I'm deviating a little bit, but regarding the Song of Songs, and I'll get to the verse of the Song of Songs authored by King Solomon. But the Song of Songs is an interesting book because it is a book of such romance that some of the sages said that maybe we shouldn't include it in the Bible, in the Tanakh, in the Jewish Bible, because it doesn't fit. It's R-rated, so to speak. And Rabbi Akiva came to its rescue. Rabbi Akiva said, no. Not only should we include it, but if all of the books of the Jewish Bible, the Tanakh, are holy, the Song of Songs is Holy of Holies, Kodesh Kodashim. So they included it. But, and it's part of what's known as the 24 books of the Tanakh. But in the book of the Song of Songs, it says like this, Ani yeshena v'libi er. I am asleep, but my heart is awake, which very often refers to the love that we have towards God. Sometimes it doesn't manifest itself because I'm asleep. I'm just too engrossed in my own bubble, in my own problems, that I don't feel the love of my heart towards God. But that heart is very much awake. Now, sometimes that awakeness of the heart permeates all of our levels of consciousness. And sometimes we have these spiritual awakenings. And during those spiritual awakenings, we feel like we are living the best version of ourselves. And we feel like we are most connected to God. Now, it happens again, sometimes just once a month, or once a year, or once a week, if we're lucky, or once a day. At Benoni, that level of connection, of intense bond, happens every single day when he or she says the Shema. The Shema is an exclamation of faith. And when we say it in the morning and in the evening, the Benoni is in a state of complete ecstasy, where his heart not only is awake within, but it's awake without. And that's when he feels like a tzaddik. That's when in many ways he is like a tzaddik. Now, it's a little bit dangerous. It's a beautiful thing, but it's also a little bit dangerous. And I want to make it practical so that we can relate to it. It's a little bit dangerous because when we have these moments of awakening, what could happen is that we become numb to all the negativities from without that are knocking at our door. We might fool ourselves into thinking that, oh, we're connected with God, so therefore we don't have to work on ourselves. I have the spiritual awakenings. That means that everything is okay. And we stop really continuing to discipline ourselves and to really refine ourselves. So that's danger number one. And the Benoni is very much aware of that what he experiences during the Shema is not necessarily reflective of his constant connection with God. And therefore, he has to continue to work and refine himself and continue to be engaged in this relationship with God. That's danger one. Danger two, I would say, is that when a person experiences this type of ecstasy, he might compartmentalize his life and say, okay, I actually am living a double life. I have a life in which I am with God, one compartment. I'm completely infatuated with God. But then when I go to work or when I continue on with my regular life, then I'm a different person. That's danger two. And in many ways, that danger is a greater danger because the goal of life is not to compartmentalize our connection with God. It's quite the opposite. To bring our connection with God everywhere, even in our workplace, even in our kitchen, even in our bedroom. God should be present wherever we go. It's not just, God is not just relegated to the Shema moments of life, to those awakenings. And even when we experience those awakenings, our duty really is to bring those awakenings then afterwards, or at least the remnants of them, to our day-to-day lives. Rabbi Steinsaltz would very often quote the Kotzker Rebbe. He would say that the big question of life is, and then what? It's easy to experience the highs, but what happens afterwards? Can you bring the highs to the lows? And the Kotzker Rebbe would very often interpret the verse that we say in the prayer that concludes the Yishtabach. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Yishtabach prayer. We sing it here at CBT, Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, and that ends with the blessing Abocher B'Shirei Zimra, Baruch Ata Hashem, and then we say Abocher B'Shirei Zimra, that God, the literal translation is God chooses the remnants of us. Sorry, God chooses the songs of our melodies. Shirei Zimra. God chooses the songs of our melodies. And God, by the way, chooses the songs of our melodies because God loves melodies, loves songs. Loves songs because songs are the language of the soul. And not only are songs the language of the soul, but songs also come from the highest world, which is called the Olam HaNegina in Kabbalah, the world of melodies. And not only does he love songs because it comes from the world of melodies, because it's the language of the soul, but because very often song really also reflective of our simcha, and it is a duty to be happy all the time, regardless of. Just gonna, there we go. Yeah, so it's reflective of our happiness all the time. But he had a different translation, by the way, and you can ask Gary and Amy, the musicians here among us. But he would translate that a little bit differently. And he would say, Abocher B'Shirei Zimra will be translated not as God who chooses the songs of our melodies, but God that chooses the Shiyarei Zimra, which really means the remnants of a melody, from the word Shiraim, or Shiyarei means remnants. And what this means is that God chooses not the moment in which we sing a song for him. God cherishes that, sure. But what he cherishes most is what comes afterwards. After you sang that song for God, after you fell in love with God, after you experienced the Shema moment, what happens afterwards? Do you still stay in that mode? Are you able to translate that mode into your everyday life? Or is it compartmentalized? Is it thrown away? Oh, you'll come back to it and now you're a different person. That's the big question. And therefore, I think that what the Tanya here is alluding to, at least, is that although we too are not, I mean, we may not be Beinonis, but although we too may experience, although me too may experience moments in which we are very, very spiritually awakened, we have to make sure that, number one.
Rabbi?
Yes. Hi, William. Hi. No,
Good morning.
Good morning. I was muting you because of your background noises. How are you?
Okay. I came in late because there was a long service today.
Oh, yes, that's right. Rosh Chodesh.
There's Rosh Chodesh, there was Hallel, there was Torah reading, and there was Musaf on top of it.
That's right.
And besides that, there was a Kiddush. But anyways,
yeah. Please.
How do you explain the Kotzker Rebbe locking himself up in his room for the last 20 years of his life and not seeing anyone?
You're going to have to ask the Kotzker Rebbe for that question. I wasn't there. Look, I think that the Kotzker Rebbe had a personality that was very fiery. And he was a complete seeker of truth. And he's extremely sensitive to lies. Extremely. And we live in what Kabbalah calls Alma de Shikra, in a world of lies. So my personal theory is that he secluded himself because he just, living in a world that was filled with lies as we live, was too painful for him. He had a very tough time dealing with it.
You know, he had to be encouraged to go attend his son's wedding. He didn't even want to do that.
I know.
So
It's
I
a
don't
disease.
understand, because the Talmud teaches us to interact, not to close ourselves off, to be with people, to help people,
Right. He
not
didn't.
not to
Yeah.
separate ourselves from people.
Yeah, but I have compassion towards the Kotzker Rebbe, very much so. I don't believe it was a philosophy of his. He wasn't trying to tell his Hasidim, hey, seclude yourselves. It was more of a mental state, an emotional state he was in. He was extremely, extremely sensitive to this world. I mean, we know people like that. Would you judge an autistic person for secluding himself? No, it's a state that he has. And I think that in many ways, the Kotzker Rebbe suffered from that tremendously. He spoke about it. And he was very, very sensitive to lies, even to his own lies. You know that he burnt all of the books that he wrote because he said maybe there's a remnant of a lie there. And I can't stand lies. Imagine that. Zero egos, just because they don't want to communicate any lies. So I don't think it was a philosophy. I think he was very much engaged with this world. Proof is that we're speaking about his teachings. But I think he had a state that was very, very painful. But the teachings that he left us are very, very brilliant. And they all reflect that same message, that truth of life. Look, that's a powerful truth. Could be even a painful truth. What we're speaking about, that it's not the highs, it's how you bring the highs to the lows that count. Everyone can fly into ecstasy. That's easy. Everyone has those spiritual awakenings. What happens afterwards? And that's what the Beinoni is able to do. He's able to take the Shema moments and translate them, as well as relate to danger number one. He's also able to not fool himself in thinking that, oh, I'm okay. I don't have to refine myself anymore. The proof is that I have these moments. Look how special I am. And
You know, the world is made up of all kinds of people. Tzibur means community.
Yeah.
And it's actually, they say, an acronym of
right. Tzaddik, Beinoni, and Rasha. Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
All these three categories. Exactly. That's right. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you for that. That's good. Okay. Let's continue here. Speaking of these Shema moments. And the Beinoni again knows that he hasn't reached, remember, danger number one, that he can rest on his laurels because those Shema moments might mean that he's not tzaddik. So he knows that this evil is only slumbering and it can later wake up again, as it says here. Let's continue. The Beinoni then has a phase.
The Beinoni then has a phase when evil can be asleep. The internal war can pause during occasions of arousal, moments of holy intensity when the adversary does not challenge him in combat. A person who recites the Shema in his heart, not for 5 minutes, but for 3 hours, can have a furlough from the war zone. If he studies Torah with self-sacrifice and enthusiasm, cleaving to Torah's source, he may very well not sense the enticement of evil, nor the need then to fight it. He might even be a Beinoni living out his days in the company of a somnolent sparring partner.
Right. So by the Beinoni, what this is also saying is that by the Beinoni, these moments appear quite often, not just when they say the Shema, but we might be studying Torah, and then he experiences a moment of complete fluid connection with God as the tzaddik lives his life each and every day. I want to speak about, just because he's alluding to this too, not that it says so clearly, but I want to speak about danger number 3 too of a year that maybe William, you were referring to. And that is that very often when we experience those moments of awakening, there's a desire within us that says, I want to stay there. Some people, it's a real thing. You can Google it. But some people, when they visit Jerusalem, they suffer an illness that can be very debilitating, sometimes temporarily and sometimes for life. I know people who suffer this illness and haven't come out of it. That illness is called the Jerusalem syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. But the Jerusalem syndrome is a syndrome in which people come to Jerusalem and they experience the holiness of Jerusalem. Maybe they go to the Western Wall and they experience that level of holiness, or they're just in Jerusalem, the holiest city in the world, and they start really flying into this ecstasy that they start thinking that they are the Messiah. And that's the peak of the syndrome. Sometimes the syndrome is just that they want to stay there. They want to stay basking in the holiness of Jerusalem, forgetting that they have a life to live, a purpose to fulfill. And that includes not just bills to pay, to come back, and the family to lead, but it also includes, you know, fulfilling your own God-given mission in this world. But they forget that because they love the holiness. They just want to stay high. It's the Jerusalem syndrome. But that, I would say, is danger number 3. For the Beinoni, he can experience these moments more often than the regular person. And those moments feel so good that in many ways, you start saying to yourself, I just want to stay here. Let me just be here with God. Let me just be with this feeling. And danger number 3 is that we don't come back to this world to live our purpose. We almost lock ourselves in this illusion. Rabbi Steinzas would call this, and I know we've spoken about this in the past, but he would call that this feeling of having a false pregnancy. That you're experiencing everything, but really there's no child that comes out. And purpose of life is to create children, not just biological, obviously, but using this metaphor, spiritual children, to make an impact, to come back and to change up the part of the world that was given to me and to me only to change. No other person is in the part of the world that I'm in. I'm not just talking about the geographical part. I'm talking about the emotional part, the social part, the spiritual part. And when you experience these moments, sometimes you go to the Kotel and you say, I want to stay there. Why should I go anywhere else? It's the best feeling in the world. And the Beinoni experiences this all the time. So the Beinoni has this challenge even more than others. But we have to remind ourselves that we were created not to fly in the heavens, but rather to bring the heavens down to earth. And that's much, much harder, but it's something that the Beinoni also fights with. So just to summarize, because it's Rosh Chodesh and I already have to go to the minyan, but just to summarize, we all, like the Beinoni, we all experience spiritual awakenings, sometimes once a day, sometimes once a week, sometimes once a month, or sometimes once a year. But we have to remind ourselves that although these spiritual awakenings are a touch from God, saying, I'm still with you, I'm here. You're in love with me, I'm in love with you. And all of these moments really, they create the greatest feelings in the world. We still have to remember that, number 1, we can't allow these feelings to stop the constant discipline and self-refinement that we have to engage in. Number 2, that we can't allow them to compartmentalize our lives, saying that, okay, this is one face of mine, me and God, and there's another face of mine somewhere else that's completely disconnected. And number 3, we can't allow these moments to paralyze us from continuing to fulfill our life missions, from coming back to this world and bringing a little piece of heaven, of that heaven that you just experienced, down to the part of the world that only you can refine, that was given to you by God to better and to elevate. So that's something that the Beinoni deals with all the time, and it's something that I think we all deal with all the time, so I think we can relate to.